Hi, everyone. Welcome to a BigLipz podcast. I'm going to be your host this week. My name is Sam Macaulay Blair. I am currently a student at SAE University. I'm transitioning from Glasgow to Liverpool, and I'm joined today by Catherine Morris, a former student who also studied at the University of Stirling. She's a two-time film student like myself. I studied at Glasgow. So this is obviously the first episode of our podcast. It will hopefully be a fairly regular thing. We aim to have these coming out bi-weekly. Basically, we'll take turns hosting it. I'm going first because someone had to, and then Catherine's going to take over for the next one. So I've picked this week's theme, which is endings, because I thought, if you're going to do a podcast and have a first episode, why not start with endings? So to get started, the first topic is going to be our favourite ending because, what better way to sort of spell out our film tastes and also what we think makes a good ending for reference for the rest of the podcast. So now that I've talked for a good minute or so, I'll hand over to Catherine, who will tell you all about our favourite ending.
Perfect, thank you. So, hello. So for this one, it took me a fair amount of time to decide what movie I was going to choose, because there's either so many endings that are amazing to choose from, or you can't think of any at all. So my choice for favourite movie ending of all time was The Wicker Man. Basically, for anyone that hasn't seen it, the whole movie revolves around Sergeant Howie, who's a policeman travelling to this small island in Scotland, I'm sure it is, because there's a young girl missing and he's to go and basically solve the case. So the ending essentially is, it turns out that the island is full of, the people on the island belong to this crazy cult basically, and have chosen Sergeant Howie to come and basically be the sacrificial lamb so that they'll have a bountiful harvest, etc. So the movie ends with Sergeant Howie being sacrificially burned within the titular Wicker Man. Essentially, I thought about this a lot. My favourite ending is that because it kind of takes this idea of like the hero cop, the one who's going to solve everything and just against all odds solve the case and get off the island, etc. But he doesn't. It's far more realistic that he isn't going to be able to fight everyone on the island. Especially because he starts to suspect that things are a bit odd early on, and then things start happening, he loses sleep over things, so he's already in a kind of like weakened state. So it does make sense that he would be sacrificed. So
what you're saying is he has it coming.
Do you know what I mean? Like, he's not gonna exactly. Not like he has it coming, just that it's you can see that it's gonna happen, but you're maybe not used to like the main character. Especially someone who's like a policeman.
Yeah, exactly. The movie points very clearly in the direction it's going. To the point where the ending is basically the title of the film as well, which is very ballsy.
Exactly.
The movie does angle exactly where it's going, but like you say, especially for a movie of its time, you don't really expect films to go that dark. And I guess the sort of power of its impact in a lot of ways is that it's it probably has like one of the most famous endings of all time. Like, without ever having seen the film, people know what the ending is, and not just because of Nicolas Cage and his dreadful remake. It's a very
That's very true. I think there's also that.
Yep.
I think there's also that sense of like, because we're seeing it from Sergeant Howie's point of view, we are kind of in the same boat where we don't quite know what's happening until the very last second when Sergeant Howie finds out what's happening. That's the moment when we realise, we're into shit, basically.
Yeah, and it's kind of like expositional, the end, isn't it? They pretty much spell out exactly what's happening and why it's happening, which you wouldn't really expect to be able to work, but it's also so horrifying that it gets away with doing that. And you don't sit there for a second thinking you're bored. Instead, you're almost quite happy for them to keep talking because it delays the inevitable. which is sort of horrifically
very
apparent.
true. Yeah. I think there's also like a sense of foreboding as well, because we don't know how many other people have they done this to, or how many other people will they do it to.
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
There's kind of like the assumption that like they need to do it for their harvest and crops and food and things like that. So how many times have they done it before?
Yeah, exactly. If they're so convinced that it works, then there must be previous. And
yep.
And I think as well,
because it doesn't look like this is the first time they've done it.
Yeah. They don't seem nearly like frightened enough. You'd be pretty horrified if it was your first time burning someone alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, they handle it quite well. So it's obviously not their first rodeo. And yeah, I guess one thing, going back to what you said, that makes it a bit more shocking as well as the fact that he is a police officer, and you have this idea of him sort of being in a sort of part of a protected institution. You sort of have this idea of the police being like a force, and the police being safe, the people that you call for safety and the people that you want involved, and there's always a sort of sense of safety with them. And I mean, that's obviously been turned on its head a lot more recently.
It just kind of makes like the cult a bit more dangerous as well. Like they clearly have no issue. They don't kind of maybe see like authority in that way. So they're just like anyone could then be the victim.
Yeah, and they obviously value their crops and their harvest more than life and human happiness.
Yeah, and that's concerning.
Very concerning. It's pretty horrifying, and it pretty much sets the benchmark for horrors and for horror endings as well. I think horrors generally kind of struggle with endings. I think a lot of time the creepiness is in the build up, but the Wicker Man does such a good job of like, it sets this tone and sets this air of like, as you sort of said, forebodingness, and everything's a bit off and creepy, but you don't think the extent of how bad things are. And then the movie really, really takes you to a place at the very end, and not just makes itself retrospectively sort of scarier, but also makes other horror movies scarier, because that then set a bar that other horror movies had to rise to.
That's true.
And it's funny that you watch something more recent like Midsommar, and straight away the vibes you start getting are of the Wicker Man, and so much.
True. Yeah, it's very similar in certain respects. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's so much of the dread that comes from Midsommar comes from the fact that you've seen the Wicker Man, or even if you haven't, you know what happens in the Wicker Man, so you know that.
Yep.
It's entirely possible that the movie will go to a very, very horrific place. But yeah,
I think Midsommar was really interesting as well, because it kind of turned it on its head, obviously, because you felt sorry for Sergeant Howie, but there was a little bit in Midsommar where you were kind of on Danny's side, even though the people who, like her boyfriend, he was not necessarily a bad person, but you saw the ending and you're like, yep, I'm behind that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they do.
Until your senses caught up with you and you were like, no, that's not right.
Absolutely. Yeah, they do a very clever subversion of the ending of the Wicker Man, where obviously you're so on Sergeant Howie's side in the Wicker Man, and obviously Midsommar makes Dani the protagonist and makes the film about her arc, and there is a catharsis and a payoff to her arc that is kind of positive, which is really at odds with, in many ways, with what happens. But it's interesting that the movie sort of had the balls to go there and do that, and to basically look at something like the Wicker Man and go, what if we saw that in a completely different light? And yeah, again, it found an interesting way into the same sort of story and the same sort of payoff as a Wicker Man. I should also note now, should have said this in the introduction, I will put the list of films that we talk about in the description as well, for anyone that might want to check and see which endings we talked about. Apologies for obviously talking about and Midsommar.
There should have been a wee spoiler alert at the beginning, but
yeah. Well, I did say we're talking about endings, so, and we did start with
True.
arguably the most famous one, so probably fairly safe on that account. Okay, fantastic. Well, I'll jump in with my pick, which was Inception, the 2010 picture by Christopher Nolan, which I'm pretty sure most people have heard of at this point. one of the things that I find watching it is I love the fact that it leaves it on such an interesting note. As soon as it ends, you almost want to start watching the film again. You want to start picking it apart for clues. It leaves you on such a hook, leaves you on such a question, but at the same time manages to do that without ever making it feel like it's setting something else up. I think a lot of movies end on, questions or cliffhangers, and straight away you're thinking, okay, where's the sequel going to be? But you have a very solid sense that Inception is a one-off story, and obviously it has been a one-off story. And it manages to end the movie on a question, but also at the same time, that question for the audience is a conclusion for the main character's arc. You have this sort of repeated motif of the spinning top and what that means, what it means to this main character, and obviously his journey and his sort of grasp of like reality versus dreams, and not knowing or having to constantly reassure himself that he's not in a dream, because obviously his wife lost her mind and thought she was in a dream. And at the end, he's able to kind of go past that and forget that and leave the top spinning. It doesn't matter to him whether he's in a dream or not. Like, he's moved past that. He's able to finally look at his children's faces. And yeah, I think it's a ridiculously impressive movie for ending at like exactly the culmination of the character's arc, and doing it in such an interesting way. And also, I think one of the interesting things about the ending of Inception is, if you had never seen that movie, never heard about that movie, and you were shown like the final shot of that movie or the final scene of that movie, you would have no idea what's going on.
That's such a good point. Yeah.
The movie builds I rewatched it recently. The movie builds a very interesting and very unique visual language that makes it, I think, so captivating that you constantly, visually, it sort of has you asking questions all the time, and it sort of pulls you in with these really unique, right at the start, when Leonardo DiCaprio's character, Dominic Cobb, is first introduced to be dreaming, you obviously see him on a seat, and he's sitting in front of a bath. And just that image alone as well is something that you've never seen in another film and wouldn't make any sense in any other film. But the movie like so intricately crafts this universe and this world and creates all these images to go alongside it. That it, in many ways, it could only work as a film. Yeah.
That's true. I think I think Inception's a great film. I do like Christopher Nolan. I think, like you were saying, it works really, really well with the tone of the film as well. I think if it was all, because the movies keeps you guessing the whole time and like keeps the characters guessing whether they're dreaming or what level of the dream they're on. So I think ending it on a kind of like ambiguous note, like, oh, is he still dreaming? Is like a really interesting way to go. Yeah. What do you think? Do you think he was dreaming or not? Or do you think it matters?
I think I change my mind every single time I watch it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I can never settle on like what I think is really the case. I think last time I watched it, actually, I was almost right up until the end. I was totally on the side of it's not a dream. He definitely goes and he definitely sees his kids for real. And then it got to that final, because that's the other thing as well. You have this like beautiful montage that leads up to it. Scored by Hans Zimmer as well. Probably like one of his most famous pieces. As you just have this montage of sort of like utter joy and happiness as like all his dreams are realised. And it is kind of strange. It is quite at odds with the rest of the film as well, with how there is a really sort of somber and serious and gritty tone to the rest of the film. You constantly feel like he is up against the odds in quite a realistic way. The movie is quite relentless in how tough his struggle is. And rewatching it, when it got to that final montage, I was like, this is actually a bit too happy. Everything goes a bit too well, and goes a bit too well exactly when it needs to. And then, when it got to that final shot at the very end, and you see, and it again, does such a good job of like, it's the top sort of solidly spinning, and then it sort of wobbles a little bit, and it gives you just enough to genuinely make you go either way. But the last time I watched it, I was like, no, it's definitely a dream. It makes way more sense if it's a dream.
Yeah, I think like what you were saying, I think it's enough that he thinks that it's real. Yeah,
exactly.
Like, it doesn't, I think if it was one way or another, it would like almost cheapen the film.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
No, it does a lot more. And for a movie that is so packed with detail, it is a very clever way to make you go back and like sort of hunger to sort of feast for details, to really like search the movie and pull it apart and try and find as much as you can in there that will give you answers. And again, the more you sort of pick at the movie, the harder it gets to find it.
Yeah.
There's so many details in that film that sort of support both hypotheses. And again, it just makes you appreciate the movie all the more. And it's the point where like the movie, the ending is obviously so talked about, the movie is obviously so talked about, and I feel like Inception is one of those films that not people haven't just seen, but people have seen more than once.
Yeah, that's very true.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm now going to jump onto the next category. Now that we've been through our favourite endings, obviously it makes sense to go to our least favourite endings, or the endings that we think are the worst. So once again, I'll let you go first, Catherine.
Yep. So when you initially said what is the worst ending you've ever seen, the first movie that came to my head, and it was so stuck there that I couldn't even think of another one, is Grease. Because I love the movie Grease. I remember I had it on video when I was young and I would watch it like every single day. And I just, even as a child, thought, why is that car flying? Just the very last second, but like, the whole movie is maybe not grounded in reality because it's a musical, but enough reality. There's doesn't seem to be any kind of.
I still feel like musicals, as much as they're sort of fanciful in their musical segments, there is a reality to them generally. It's generally kind of accepted and like understood that like the musical segments are a bit metaphorical, and you're not actually watching everyone burst into song and dance, and then just go back to normal as if nothing ever happened. Like it's kind of clear that that's not part of like the everyday going on. But yeah, you're right. Like the end of Grease, I watched Grease for the first time last summer, and I'm pretty sure that I had seen. I think Channel 4 did like some show years ago on like famous movies, and I'm pretty sure I remember them talking about a flying car at the end, but I totally forgot until the film. So even though a part of me knew it was coming, it got to the end of the movie and I was like, what? It's just so it's so inconsistent with the rest of the film, and it doesn't really add anything to it.
It adds nothing. My favourite part is that the only person who looks shocked are Sandy and Danny. Everyone else is just like, oh yeah, is he?
Yeah, exactly.
And then they just accept it like, yes, this car flies. Can you believe it?
I know, and it leaves it like the movie would have worked absolutely fine with them driving off into the sunset. Like you really don't need them flying off, and them flying off rather than you kind of watching it and going, well, that's nice for the characters. You do just kind of go, what? And where are they going? Like, what happens to them?
Exactly.
This film ends? Like, it has you asking the wrong kinds of questions at the wrong time.
It's very distracting. Like, it completely takes you out of the entire movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think as well, it's funny because it almost is like that they wanted something really cool to end off with, but I would argue that the whole movie was pretty cool. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, the movie is. It pioneered a lot of like fashion, didn't it? And it is hugely iconic, to the point where like nightclubs play the song, or back when there were nightclubs, they played the songs. Everyone
knows the words to the songs.
Yeah, exactly, and everyone knows the main characters. Everyone is aware of the story, even if they've never seen it, because the sort of content of it does transcend the actual film. But yeah, like I don't think I've ever really heard the ending talked about that positively.
I think it's funny as well because a lot of people have an issue with like they always mention that Sandy completely changed her entire character for Danny, and so did he, because he became like a jock or whatever.
Yeah.
But that is I don't even think about that anymore because I'm like, but there was a flying car. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Like that's completely dwarfed by the fact that the car flew away.
Well, they've changed themselves, so the car's changed too.
That's true, yeah. So maybe it is consistent.
Yeah, exactly.
You've just not been looking at it properly.
Yeah, I know. It's funny how it does sort of eclipse discussions, and yeah, there's just no need for it.
No.
Yeah,
Such a weird. It's funny because someone's obviously had the idea, and then other people have thought, "Yeah, that would be a good idea." Like, yeah, let's do that. That sounds great.
I know.
There's probably someone somewhere like, "Oh God, I should have fought harder and said no."
Yeah, I know. It's a very odd one, and again, it is just the fact that it's a musical, and they could have had, if they'd wanted to go down that route, they could have at least had something in there to imply that was possible. Usually these things are set up in some way. The movie doesn't change gears and become a different film effectively in the final few seconds.
Because it's like not even like a minute of the film at the very end.
I know. Yeah, exactly. You'd literally just swap it out for them driving off. Again, that's the weirdest thing, is like there's no reason that them driving off into the sunset doesn't work. There's no
exactly.
Car flying must have been a lot more labor intensive for the people involved in making it.
Yep, you could have exactly the same shot, but just have them driving off. Do you know what I mean?
It would have been cheaper and better.
Exactly.
Those shines to go the route of like more difficult, more expensive, and less satisfying.
Yeah,
I'd be very curious. I'm curious if that was in the original script, or if that was like the director's choice. I'm curious at what point that was like decided. And if the idea was like, or if, like, wonder if that was, you get writers that talk about knowing the ending of film before they start writing it.
They just did this image.
Yeah, right from the start, he's like, where this is going to lead to one car. And it makes sense to whoever wrote it that's where it was going, but not to anyone else who's ever watched it.
Yep, that's so funny.
Yeah, and you do get musicals that have an element of like the fantastical.
Like Moulin Rouge and stuff. There's a lot in there that.
Moulin Rouge is insane with everything that it does, but that's the thing, it establishes it very early
from the beginning. Yep.
Even La La Land obviously has like, is there not a segment where they go to the planetarium and then they're sort of like dancing amongst the stars? But usually when the movies have these like strange, otherworldly or sort of fantastical elements, they had them in earlier.
So they're not
very last second. That's the thing, isn't it? Like all the actual like musical numbers are just like choreographed within like the setting that they're in. Like to the point where obviously was it that one of the last musical numbers, they're on the rides and they're sort of like singing each other and going along them.
Yeah.
They always use the environment. So it's always very much, we are literally in the place that we're in and we're singing and we're dancing until the end when we're in a car that can fly. Which I
think it's funny as well because they established the musical part from the very beginning, because the credits are all this whole like musical, the opening credits. And then
there's nothing in the car, is there? There's nothing in the opening credits that even suggests, because there's a cartoon segment, isn't there? There's nothing in that, is there, that suggests flying car? Because that would have been the time to put it in.
That's true, yeah, even just in the background.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, because it would have just put an image in people's heads, and you could have done it with animation, and people would have been like, "Oh, it's flying car." But then at least at the end, they'd have been like, "Oh, well, that was in there."
Yeah, it did show that in the beginning. Yep.
But they really sat on that secret and then unveiled it in the weirdest way.
Maybe they thought it was going to be like the biggest plot twist ever.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe they didn't have faith in
it. Wait till people see this.
Any of the rest of the films. So they're like, well, we need to end it in a way that it's just going to distract people from everything they've just watched. Make it feel worthwhile.
That's funny.
Yeah, but no, very, very strong pick. And yeah, I do have to say it is one that definitely came to mind because of the fact that it is so jarring and so odds with what comes before it. My pick is, sort of in keeping with my Christopher Nolan theme, is Interstellar. Obviously it's 2014 release. And to be honest, I don't hate this ending. I don't actually think it's an all-round terrible ending. But I think the issue with it is the rest of the movie, more or less the first 2/3 of the movie, are so strong, I think, that the movie kind of collapses a little bit at the end. And it does a really weird thing where it's almost too neat. It's almost like too neat and too specific, but also too vague and ambiguous at the same time. with obviously it coming down to it going from like the movie sets a really good tone and precedent for being really like grounded and really scientific. Obviously, they had actual physicists brought on board. In fact, they actually helped with some research on black holes with the making of the movie.
Is it not? Did they not get like the most like a much more full understanding of what a black hole would look like because of the work on the movie?
Yeah, I believe because when they were using the technology to actually map the effects and created an engine to generate to figure out what a black hole would do. And the scientists who'd been studying that field never really had access to that amount of money. What they were looking at or looking for. So it did help move the science along a little bit, which I do have to give the movie props for. I think the rest of the film is just so brilliant. It's really, really bleak, and again, like I said, really, really grounded and realistic, and so rooted in science. And to then go for this, this love is a really powerful force, and the idea that the black hole is created by like higher dimensional beings feels it feels like too neat and too lazy at the same time, because it's just like so easy to just say that we saved ourselves from the future by putting this black hole exactly where it needed to be, and basically putting a bookshelf in it, putting the tesseract inside it, so that you communicate with your past. And it is a shame because the more powerful moments in that movie, like the moment where Matthew McConaughey's character Copper sits down and watches the recordings of his lives that he's missed, and just breaks down, and it is obviously really heartbreaking. The movie doesn't quite undo that in the end, because he does still miss basically all of his daughter's life, but it does come pretty close to undoing it. And the fact that he goes from being inside a black hole to on her deathbed just feels a bit too nice, and a bit too sentimental. And as much as it's nice to think that the universe is a good place, the rest of the movie is all about the Earth is dying and space.
And even the other planets that they go to are just uninhabitable, and people die there, or people die trying to get off them, and it's just
it does depict a very cruel universe, and then to turn that around and go, actually the universe cares about love, it's a bit,
it was very like Disney-esque, this whole idea of like love's true kiss and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. I know. It's just not the place that you really expect to see that. Even Disney has sort of retired that trope. I think with Frozen, they even kind of the whole idea of love's kiss and stuff like that. So even they've backed away from
That's true,
too soppy and sentimental. And it's really weird that a really bleak movie about interstellar travel is the one that decides to bring that back. And I don't think that's the thing. I think it's a shame, because I think a lot of people don't ever really, don't talk about Interstellar that much, or don't rate it that highly because of the fact the ending lets it down. And I still think that the rest of the movie has so much going on for it. I do think it's an all-round terrific movie, but that's what makes it a shame, is it really could be, you look at something like, you can tell it's very much going for the vibe of 2001: A Space Odyssey. That obviously has a much, much clearer point that it's making, and it does it a lot more artistically and ambiguously, and also did it at a point when movies couldn't really do that. It pioneered a lot of effects and a lot of ideas. It was really, really brave in its time, in the way that it was telling its story. And you can tell that Christopher Nolan kind of looked at that and thought, I want some of that, which isn't a bad thing. And he's far from the first filmmaker to have done that, but he sort of tried to apply his intricate plotting to it a bit too much, and tried to make
it's almost like he wanted too much from it. He wanted it to be almost like two different movies, or two different genres as well.
Exactly. I guess he's kind of tried to do with Interstellar. He's kind of tried to do 2001 what Midsommar did with Wicker Man. He's just not been quite as successful. And again, the sad thing is when he's kind of doing his own thing, he's making a much better film. And when he starts leaning too much into the Stanley Kubrickisms, then he loses control of it. I guess that is a shame. But yeah, I think ultimately, like every single time I watch it, I do just wish that the ending came together. The ending was just a bit stronger.
Yeah, I think the word I would use to describe the ending is just disappointing.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, it could have been. I have no idea how I would have ended it, but
I'm the same. Like, and that kind of makes it. I kind of feel bad sometimes talking about it having a disappointing end, because I'm like, well, I don't know what I'd do with it, but then I'm also not the one that chose to make that movie. So
that's true.
And I do think that pretty much everyone that has seen it has agreed to that. It just doesn't end. Even if they really like the film, the ending does have flaws, and that, or if the movie has flaws, the flaws are in its ending. How it sort of cobbles that together. Okay, fantastic. Right. So obviously we've had favourite ending, we've had our least favourite endings. So next up, we're going to go for an ending that we thought was better than it had any right to be. So, there are a million films out there that are sort of disengaging or are quite weak or seem really predictable, and then somehow miraculously at the very end they manage to spin things round, and you actually do feel like, okay, I've not wasted my time here. Like, I'm actually glad that I sat through this, because even though the build-up wasn't very good, even though I wasn't that hooked or that intrigued, like, it did actually pay things off. So at the very least, I don't feel like I've wasted my time, and there has been like some substance to this. I feel like I've actually got a valued experience from it. So once again, I'll let you talk.
Yep. So my choice, this one I think was a lot harder, because just because things like really good endings or really bad endings stick out a lot more.
Yes.
I felt. But the movie I went for was Atonement. I think purely because it was very, like, I do have a bit of a soft spot for Atonement. I think I like it more than most people.
Yeah.
But I think because the whole movie is it's like this period drama, because obviously, I mean, Keira Knightley's in it, who loves a good period piece. And it's all about like love and heartache and war and things like that. And then at the very end, after you've seen the whole movie, there, like Robbie and Cecilia, they have their whole lovely life together, and then at the very end, it's an interview with Bryony, who's talking about her new book, and then this is the moment when she's an old woman and she decides to tell the truth and say, "Oh, that is not true. None of that's true. Because of what I did, Robbie died in the war, and her sister died drowning in an underground train station during like a bombing." I think it was so, because it had set such like the tone of all this going through like the war, and it was going to be a tragedy, but oh look, they managed to get back together because love conquers all. And then it turns out that was all a lie. And I think as well how it's like a good character arc for her as well, because obviously she's a child when it starts, and it's her that lies and gets Robbie into trouble, which means that they can't be together. So her admitting that in the end is almost like she's come full circle, and she's realised, here's what I've done wrong and here's how I'm trying to correct it.
Yeah, absolutely. She does. She confesses on a global scale.
Yeah, it's not even just like she's telling like her children or something. She's she's almost like bearing her soul to, like, because it's like a television interview and stuff, and by that point she's like a pretty famous writer, so people would be tuned in to what she was saying.
Yeah, exactly. And she admits that obviously she's written a book on the events, and she's obviously given the book a different ending than what actually happened. And it's a very effective rug pull as well, where you see a segment from that book. Effectively the movie's almost constructed as if you were watching an adaptation of that book right until the very end. It ends with an interview of the writer, to the point where like there's even like sort of subtle clues and stuff dropped through it with like, I think Bryony's theme for the movie is like basically a typewriter, isn't it? It makes it very clear that like writing and reading is a big sort of theme. And yeah, it's a really, really strong rug pull. and Gut Punch, where you find out where she went and spoke to her sister and Robbie, and obviously confessed to them, and tried to make things right. You find out that didn't actually happen, and it makes it all the more sort of haunting, and all the more sort of impactful when you find out that that never happened. They never got together. They both died, and it was her fault.
Yeah,
lived with that her whole life, and then come clean on that. And that she says she's basically got dementia then, doesn't it? And her brain's going to have a series of
I think she's I think it's interesting as well, because it kind of, you'd like to think that you would be all high and mighty, like, oh, I would never have done that. But then it's like, it's not an unhuman thing that she's done. Do you know what I mean? She was a child at the time, and it was awful what she did, but I don't know. It's like I think it makes you like sit up and pay attention to the end of the movie as well. Like, even if you were getting a wee bit bored, the minute she says, oh, that's not true, here's what actually happens, it's a bit like, all right. I wasn't expecting that kind of thing.
No, absolutely. Like, I think when I watched it, the thing I found was the movie starts off really strong. I really like how they did a really good job of putting you in her shoes, and they obviously show you events sort of from her perspective first before rewinding a little bit and then giving you the context of what happens so that you understand why she thinks what she thinks. And it almost uses a period setting against it, with the idea of like, she lives in this sort of like English countryside, and everyone's a bit sort of repressed and again, very English, in that they aren't really able to talk about how they feel and how they think, and because of that, she's not really, obviously the sort of vulgarity of what she sees between Robbie and Celia or Cecilia. Because of like the vulgarity that she witnesses and the way in which she witnesses it, it really does stick out. And unfortunately, it obviously happens at the same time as a bit of child molestation. But it does obviously not only sell you on her perspective of events, but in the fact that she's a child. And it's not just, there's sort of a series of lies told by a number of different people, and a number of unfortunate things that she witnesses in unfortunate ways that leads her to effectively lying about what she sees, and condemning Robbie and killing him. And I definitely didn't expect the movie to so completely show you her character and take you from her to her as an old woman. And it does, like the events at the start of the film aren't just like events that happen and affect, because it could have easily been like the setup, and then the movie's about Keira Knightley and James McAvoy and their love story, and it's just creating this barrier. But it actually does a really good job of making that not just an event that affects and completely changes their lives, but an event which haunts and like completely changes Bryony as a character.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like, you would always just kind of see her as like the bad guy.
Yeah.
But then even in the end, she's still the bad guy, but there is a bit of like redemption, because she's like,
exactly. And I think
I feel badly about that.
I think we do a very good job of like, the movie almost like drops the character for a while. You have it sort of like start on her, and then it becomes very much about sort of Keira Knightley and James McAvoy, and then it continues being about them for like a very long time, and it really focuses on James McAvoy for ages.
Because it follows him while he's in the war and stuff like that as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly, for ages. And then it eventually goes, and you really do have this sort of like resentment for Bryony, because after she lies and condemns him, I don't think it really goes near that character for a while. So it lets that event sit and lets your feelings on that character sit in a dark place and in a bad place. And then when it finally does go back to that character, obviously, I think they also make an effort of showing that, and because of what she's done, she does make an effort to obviously become a war nurse, and tend to people. And there is very much a sense of she makes herself pay for what she's done, and she utterly regrets it. And again, she was a child at the time. It is a dreadful thing that she does. And
it's that kind of thing as well, where it's already happened. Do you know what I mean? She can't do anything or until that point, I suppose.
Exactly.
But by that point, it's too late. So
exactly. Yeah, it's all just very unfortunate. You know, the whole timing of everything is very unfortunate. If it hadn't happened around World War II, then things would have been very different.
That's true. Yeah,
and it does a very good job of the movie becomes. There's a nice sort of balance of like tragedy and romance in the film, I think. And yeah, Atonement is very aptly the name of the film. Yeah, and like you were saying as well, like I definitely found myself during like the sort of middle stretch of the movie not really paying as much attention. I did find myself drifting a little bit, but those sort of like final scenes, I really was just like glued to the screen, and yeah, I was genuinely like, and you do get emotional, and you're like, okay, well, the movie has clearly been very effective in what it's telling and paying it off very well, rather than just going the easy route and giving them a happy ending. Oh, you know, they had their fights and they had their struggles, but they got together in the end. I like the fact that it's like they don't.
Yeah, they don't. Aye.
Everyone suffers.
That's the story of life.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, my pick for this category was the 2016 movie Before a Week, which was a sort of low budget horror movie I think I found on Netflix years ago. And the gist of the movie is I think I've watched it one time and I've not gone back to it since. This couple adopts a child, don't they? And the child sort of has these dreams, has these nightmares, and they realise that the child's dreams are sort of manifesting. Well, obviously, while the child is asleep, there is an element of like the fantasy in that happening, but it being a horror. You know, the child starts having nightmares, starts manifesting. There's one monster in particular called the Canker Man, and that sort of sets up the sort of scares and the danger of the film. And for the most part of the movie, like I really wasn't, you know, that enamored by it. I wasn't engaged. It is very much feels like a low budget horror movie.
Yeah.
I don't think it's very effective, and it scares. I don't think it's very convincing, and it's sort of. I wasn't at any point really freaked out by the Canker Man. But at the very end, the movie obviously does have the strong emotional payoff where it delves into the sort of psychology behind the child, and you find out that the Canker Man was in fact the child's cancer-stricken mother. Obviously,
you shouldn't laugh, but
I know. Well, it's almost like hilarious how sort of left field it is, but it also is sort of nicely, subtly set up in the design of the Canker Man, and even obviously the name. It being how a child would think of cancer, and thinking of cancer as this sort of evil demonic force that came and took its mother away, rather than it just being what tragically happened to his mother. And yeah, again,
that's true. It's interesting because like when you described the ending there, it sounded funny, but it wasn't funny during the movie. Like it made sense, and it was very like, oh god, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think because you've obviously been with the characters for a while at that point as well, and it's funny because by the end of the movie I wasn't really taking it that serious, and for it then to actually have a bit of like a road pull and a bit of like an emotional payoff, I was like, okay, like again, I wasn't expecting it to have. Horror movies typically don't have, as we sort of said before, strong endings. Certainly not very emotional endings. You know, they usually go for I don't know how many horror movies end with like a jump scare or like one final the monster's back sort of thing. So for it to actually sort of wrap things up, conclude things, and then explain what it all meant and what it meant to the characters was quite nice and quite surprising. And again, it gave the movie just sort of a bit of substance to it that wasn't otherwise there. And,
definitely.
In most low budget horror films isn't really there. And it's the only reason that, like, you know, that's again, composing this list, it could be quite easy to pick a horror movie for every category because horror movies sort of, they really go there with their endings and they get like varied results. But yeah, I think that's probably the best instance I've seen of something not really being very good, but actually managing to save itself. So yeah, I think all round surprisingly strong.
It was interesting as well because it kind of had the like a almost like a redemption arc for the mum character.
Yeah.
Because she had kind of spent some of the movie using the boy, like showing him videos of her son that had died, so that when the little boy dreamed of it, she would get to see her son again. So there was kind of like she was using him for a period, and she even like drugged him at one point so that he would sleep, so that she could see her son and things like that. And then in the end, it's her that goes and she kind of rescues him from the canker man, and then she's the one that explains it.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is nice. Like,
yeah, again, yeah, he actually uses his characters and makes you feel a variety of different things for the characters as well, which is again, I guess that's another sort of facet of horror movies, is you get a lot of one-note characters that you don't really.
Yeah.
And not, horror movies, they tend to evoke single emotions from their characters. Even the good ones do that. I think that was Stephen King's critique of The Shining, wasn't it? That right from the start of the movie, you totally.
Jack Nicholson looks crazy. Yeah.
Nicholson, when he's in that tiny little car, still absolutely mental, and you're like, it does feel like he's driving them to, which works in the movie's favor, but you're not in any way surprised at the direction that film goes. But yeah, for the movie to actually do different things with its characters and to almost redeem a character that, like you say, does do some very questionable things for a mother.
Yeah.
It's quite nice. And I guess that's the other thing as well, isn't it? That horror movies can do that with characters more than any other sort of medium can. You couldn't really have a character that drugs their child and sort of but you end up really sort of rooting for them and their payoff by the very end.
That's true.
And you kind of just gloss by that.
That would be a bit questionable if it was in like just a drama or something.
Yeah, exactly.
You'd be like, that woman needs to go to jail.
I know, the scares almost like put things in perspective a little bit, and you just with their actions, because you're like, well, their lives in danger at all points.
Just they're fine. I understand.
Yeah, exactly. I might have done that too, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay, cool. Well, we'll move on to the very last category then. So obviously we've been through favourite ending, worst, and better than having a right to be. And the obvious final category would be the most surprising ending that we've seen in a film. So Catherine, off you go.
Yeah, this one was another one that there's so many movies out there that you're like, oh my God, that was such, like, I didn't see that coming. And then you go through movies like Fight Club's always a good one for most surprising, and Seven and stuff like this. Like, just anything by David Fincher, really. But the one I chose was Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, because even though when the first time I watched it, I was watching it with a friend, and even though we both knew what the twist was, both of us were still properly scared.
Yeah.
And it was so shocking, even though I knew what the ending was, that it was Norman and it wasn't his mother. Yeah. It was still so shocking. Just because the way that it was just been like masterfully done the whole way through.
Absolutely.
And there's like, it's creepy because, when I was watching it the first time, I knew that his mother was dead, but then there's bits when you see a glimpse of her, when like he's taking her down into the basement, and you think, oh, well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe she is alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though I watched it 50 years after it came out.
Yeah, really, really sells you on. It hides its twist so well.
Yep.
It does really set up the idea that she's very much alive. Obviously, you hear them like talking to each other, don't you? Arguing with each other.
Yep.
And yeah, you totally buy into it. And again, I suppose similar to Wicker Man, it does a really good job of not just completely shocking you, but as a result, it totally raises the stakes. And the shock comes in service of the movie's scares rather than like to their detriment. It comes in, really, really like twisting up and makes you sit at the edge of your seat. And I think as well with that movie, obviously when it came out in its time, and the first time I saw it, I was about 12 years old, so I was surprised by most of the events in it. But you almost don't expect the twist, because the movie already has its shocking moment where it kills off its protagonist.
At the first third of the movie, yeah,
exactly, which was again so like bold of it to do. Wasn't something that any films at its time were doing. To do that, to have that like twist early on, and then still have like an absolute blinder of a twist for the end of the film is utter genius.
Yep. Even like the whole last section of the film, like the whole thing is scary. Like when Marion's sister goes into the house, and you're instantly tense because you know that something is up. And then the whole bit when she's in the basement and she sees the mum, and it lasts for like a good 10-15 minutes, and the whole time is really scary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's ridiculous. It's so well done. I mean, it's not original to say that Hitchcock is a master of his craft.
Master of suspense.
He really knows what he's doing with the stuff. But yeah, I don't think he ever did it better than he did with Psycho. And yeah, I mean, again, it's still like, it genuinely does still hold up so well as a film and as a horror film as well. Like the fact that a movie that old, because it's the first time that you saw a toilet flushing on screen, wasn't it? Which really puts in perspective just how old the film is. For a movie that's that old to actually still be scary. Because it must. When did Psycho come out? Do you know?
I think it was 60s, maybe 63s, kind of in my head.
Very, very long time. Yeah, for it to still be scary after all these years is insane. 60 years later, is genuinely a feat that I don't think a lot of horror movies will be able to boast. And yeah, I guess for the fact that, like you said, for you to know the twist and still be surprised by it, and for you to know effectively what happens but still be scared, is also really powerful. I think it's an excellent choice for most surprising ending, because it's just so effectively done. So I've gone for obviously a very different choice. My pick is a much more recent affair, which is the 2018 picture Sorry to Bother You, which is a sort of comedy drama, I guess you could say. The movie is very like stylistically strange. It's very unique. I really obviously enjoyed I enjoyed the way that it sort of tells its story, and right from the start, you are presented with this really sort of fast moving and sort of quirky film. And I think in a lot of ways, to me, it kind of felt like a play almost you're watching. It's this sort of heightened reality. It does these sort of like weird, I think there's a bit where the main character moves out of like a basement that or a sort of garage that he stays in, into his own like flat, and they have like him and his girlfriend lying in their bed, and sort of covers are pulled away, the TV's like pulled apart and replaced by a new one, and it's just done like a really interesting way. And right from the start, when he gets the job in the call center, and obviously he's picking up phones and he's phoning people, and then he's dropped down in front of them as if he's it sets up this whole sort of weird tone, but despite that, the movie goes in the weirdest direction.
I have never been more surprised in my entire life. Like, gun to my head, I would never, ever in my life have said, here's what I think's going to happen.
Yeah. No, I think I remember when the film, because I didn't see it when it first came out. I saw it like a couple of years later, and I remember just seeing trailers, and I think I remember seeing reviews, and the one thing people were talking about was, oh wow, this movie it takes a turn, it goes in a really surprising direction. And I think that usually ruins a film when you hear that. I can't. The amount of films that have been ruined because someone has said to you, you mentioned Seven before. Seven was ruined for me because of the fact that someone said before I watched it, well, you're never going to guess the twist. So then naturally, I guess going.
I had Fight Club was ruined for me.
It's isn't it? Like as soon as you know there's something to look out for, it becomes so easy to spot, but not with Sorry to Bother You.
No. Because I watched it knowing that you had chosen it as your most surprising ending, and I was surprised, to say the least.
Yeah, like It tells you the rug underneath you. It tells you it's going to pull it, and it's you still manage to be surprised when it does, even though you see it reach down and pulling it. It still takes you by surprise. It is such a mental film, but also, and I think the thing that I kind of love about it as well is the first time I was watching it, you almost expect the film to just sort of end there. Feel like it's wrapping up at that point, and there's still a solid chunk of movie that comes afterwards. And it keeps sort of hitting you with twists and turns right to the very end.
Oh my God, that very last second was so scary.
And it telegraphs it so much where it's his constant anxiety, isn't it, that he's worried that he is going to turn into one of the Equisapiens, and he's asking for his nose to be checked and stuff like that, and he's worried about it for so long. And the movie does again such a good job of you're like, okay, well, he's definitely in the clear, and then just the last seconds, and he then obviously pulls his face. And I think as well, what the thing that's really genius about it is, I don't know if you thought this as well, but when it happens, I think he closes like the garage door, hits his face, and then he's like, he's obviously covering his nose, and then he falls down on one knee. And I was watching it, I was like, oh, that's really cute. He's going to do this, like
he's going to propose.
Because it looks like that's what he's about to do, and he pulls back his hands and he's got horse nostrils.
Oh. And at that, just holding that for just the split second made it even scarier.
Yeah, exactly. You just sort of see it, and then it cuts. And then, as if that's not enough, because then the title pops up, doesn't it? And then there's a little bit more of the film, then sort of like ties that up and sort of pays that off with what's happened, rather than leaving it on a question. It sort of gives you a bit more closure. It's an insanely unique film, and insanely interesting as well. And if there are so many great twist endings, but I genuinely don't think I can think of anything that has utterly shocked me more. And I think every single person that I know that's seen it, I always say to them, like, just don't look anything up about the film, just go in blind, because.
Yeah, I'm so glad that I did, because I was just like, because there was a couple of your movies that I hadn't seen, so I was like, I'll just work my way through them. And wow.
Yeah, it packs a punch, and it also has like a very strong message. It has some very interesting characters. There's some great jokes in it. It's an all-round good movie, but it definitely deserves points for being so surprising and also being so contemporary, because.
I think it's funny because I think I've definitely worked in places where if they could get away with that, they 100% would. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there is like a real plausibility to it that is quite horrifying. I think I think that's almost what sells it as well, is like it stops it from being an out and out. Because again, that's the other thing is, if you described that movie to someone, you would think, okay, well that's got to be like an out and out joke. It's you couldn't first take that seriously, but it does such a good job of selling you on the fact that could happen. And you do very much buy into, with all the stories that have come out and all the things that you've seen companies do, ways that they've exploited people, you do totally buy into the idea that if they could turn people into horses to just squeeze that little bit more efficiency out of them, absolutely would.
I think they definitely would. I definitely know a few companies that would.
Yeah, it's a very terrifying time we live in. Hopefully, by existing, that movie helps change the tide a little bit. And
I feel like there'd be like big business owners that would be looking at that thinking, do you know what?
Yeah, I know. And well, I rewatched it the other day, and it's one thing that is a bit strange now with recent events is. I don't know if you're aware of like the Army Hammer stuff that's come out.
Yes.
Yeah, his sort of hits on a bit of a different note now.
That's a shame, because I watched it and I couldn't help but when the minute I saw him, I was like, oh. He's pretty mental himself, and he almost like casting that's done a bit too well. Yeah.
He's too much at home. But again, like, it's funny because usually when there's a sort of scandal on a celebrity, it kind of ruins that celebrity's films. Obviously, I think I remember one sort of famous example being Baby Driver, effectively being ruined by Kevin Spacey. There's a very, very unfortunate line in that movie where he says, "Was it look at the balls on that kid?"
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it does in a lot of ways sort of taint your experience of that film. But sorry to bother you, because of the character it has him playing, you can very much watch that movie knowing what you know about him, and you're like, okay, well, like that just adds to the feelings that I have for this character, because he's not a likable guy.
That's so true. Yeah.
But yeah. So cool. With that, then I'll wrap things up. And yeah, I thought that'd be a bit more of an interesting note to finish on, especially after like some of the sort of somber and bleak endings that we've talked about. But yeah, so that sort of concludes the first episode of this podcast. As I mentioned at the start, obviously Catherine will be holding the next instalment. I have no idea what she's going to do for it, but I'm trying.
I've got a couple ideas.
Well, I'm looking forward to doing them. I'm looking forward to seeing them. So with that, yeah, I'll sign off and say thank you for watching. Hopefully see you next time.